Russia don't seem so fucking hoaxy today, now does it? According to Avery Lotz of Axios, House Scooter Mike Johnson and others in the GOP chided Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Sunday following a heated Oval Office meeting with President Trump and Vice President Vance on Friday. The tense exchange between the three leaders has further soured an already strained relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. Johnson said on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday that Zelenskyy needs to, quote, come to his senses, end quote, and return to the negotiating table, quote, in gratitude, or someone else needs to lead the country to do that, end quote. He argued the U.S. is not abandoning Ukraine, but criticized the country's leader for appearing, quote, rather stiff-necked in the Oval Office instead of being gracious and saying thank you and looking out for a way out of this mess, end quote. Zelenskyy was accused by Vance of not saying thank you during the Oval Office showdown, but the Ukrainian leader has thanked the U.S., both Presidents Biden and Trump, for its support dozens of times. After Zelenskyy publicly questioned Vance's definition of diplomacy, the barbs started to fly. The vice president accused the Ukrainian leader of disrespect and argued he led, quote, propaganda tours. Trump, who described Zelenskyy as an unelected dictator last month, told his visitor he was, quote, not in a good position, saying, quote, you don't have the cards, end quote. According to Alexandra Marquez of NBC News, following the contentious meeting, Senator Lindsey Graham called on Zelenskyy to resign, telling reporters at the White House that the meeting was a, quote, complete, utter disaster. I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelenskyy again, end quote. Graham said, adding that the Ukrainian president, quote, either needs to resign and send somebody over here that we can do business with, or he needs to change, end quote. Johnson on Sunday echoed the president and vice president, telling Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker Zelenskyy, quote, berated and interrupted his host instead of expressing gratitude for the extraordinary help that the U.S. has provided his country, end quote. Johnson also argued that security guarantees were inherent in the mineral rights deal, telling Welker, quote, this mineral rights deal is a win for everyone. It will give us access to rare earth minerals that we need. It will provide a level of security for Ukraine, end quote. Mike Johnson is so full of shit. He's a Nazi fascist and makes no secret about it. Scooter is probably the most evangelical Christian nationalist ever to hold the speaker's gavel. And Johnson was the extremist traitor who wrote the congressional plans for January 6th and continued leading the decertification efforts after the attack. Never forget, 147 traitors still voted against certification in the wee hours of January 7th. When Congress returned January 6th, Lindsey Graham swore up and down that he has had enough and he was done with Trump because he'd gone too far. Then a couple days later, he got punked by some traitors at the Reagan airport and had to realign with them. That's the thing about Lindsey Graham, is he's only as good as the person next to him. He has no integrity or spine. He just says whatever serves his masters in the moment. And how can anybody trust a senator who is so obviously gay but still refuses to come out of the closet in 2025 because of his donors? Donors with boners. As for the meeting in the Oval Office, President Zelenskyy was the only one with any right to be there. Trump, Vance, and Rubio are Nazi fascist traitors who should have been lawfully prevented from taking office by the Insurrection Act in the 14th Amendment. The meeting was disgraceful. You can't call things shameful anymore because Republicans have none. Trump might not think I have any cards, but I do have one from the Illuminati card game made by Steve Jackson Games in 1994. Other game cards have been objectively prophetic, and we need something fun to play with. So I got some truth to tell. Let's do this. conspiracy theory I actually want to get behind. According to Joe Summerlad with The Independent in April of 2021, an out-of-print multiplayer card game that first appeared in 1994 is continuing to attract interest and unease online over its apparently eerie ability to predict major global events from 9/11 to the election of Donald Trump, the coronavirus pandemic, and the failed insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. While the game's preoccupation with globalist deep state conspiracy themes was clearly wildly ahead of its time, anticipating our bamboozled, boggle-brained era of fictional election rigging claims, QAnon, anti-vaxxers, 5G paranoia, and seething app-based nonsense cauldrons like Telegram, it's the 2000 AD tarot-style illustrations on the cards themselves that are the real source of fascination. Illuminati's terrorist nuke card, for instance, shows an explosion midway up a skyscraper in a scene that looks undeniably like the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11th. One depicts a bomb blast at the Pentagon. The next shows barbed wire fencing around the White House, shielding the president from civil unrest. A scene realized in summer 2020 during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Lafayette Square in response to the police killing of George Floyd. And speaking of Trump, there's even a charismatic leader card that features a blonde-haired demagogue addressing a crowd of adoring supporters in a seemingly uncanny forecast of the reality TV businessman's rise to power. Amusing given that he was a bankrupt Atlantic City casino failure at the time of the game's launch, with very little prospect of ever being taken seriously again. There's a Hillary Clinton card in the deck and a tree-hugging Al Gore. They were First Lady and Vice President at the time. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein makes an appearance, and there is a particularly gruesome card anticipating the advent of militant political correctness, now a regular bugbear of Fox News and the rest of the conservative media ecosystem, which portrays two hanged men holding signs announcing their crimes. A card to which this story never gets around to, and it is actually my personal favorite. It was my first post on Twitter after the election was decided in 2016, because it was, and apparently still is, our only hope at seeing light, anticipating there may be an end to this infinite tunnel of darkness. Enough is enough says that at any place, at any time, our snipers can drop you. Have a nice day. So, come on, Illuminati, whose side you on? When will enough be enough? Because I've had enough. You know, are you going to wait until we're part of the new Soviet Union? Well, yeah, probably, because it's all an Illuminati plan, and enough will be enough when he's done serving their interests, and can be made into an example of Putin's power, I guess. I don't believe in any of this crap anyway, no matter how much I want to, because it's nice to have hope. But Trump also trashed my belief in God. I was born-again Christian when Trump was elected the first time. But a loving, just God would never have let us get COVID with that moron in office, unless it was some kind of passive-aggressive punishment for electing him. So fuck you, God. I'm done with your passive-aggressive douchebaggery. I ain't worshiping that stupid fucking crap. Come down here, face me like the man, whose image I was created. Or you and your mom can both worship this. You know how childless cat ladies are really good at arts and crafts? I never thought of this before, but it turns out that protest signs are technically crafts. Who knew? According to the AP, crowds protesting Vice President J.D. Vance lined roadways Saturday near a Vermont ski resort where he planned a weekend vacation with his family. Many of the hundreds of demonstrators held signs in support of Ukraine, while other anti-war protesters waved Palestinian flags or signs in support of immigrant rights. Protesters showed up at several locations in the area, including both sides of Route 100 in Waitsfield. Though demonstrations were planned days in advance, they were energized Saturday morning by a heated Oval Office exchange a day earlier between Vance, President Donald Trump, and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy. Vance berated Zelenskyy for challenging Trump's assertions that Russian President Vladimir Putin could be trusted. Republican Governor Phil Scott issued a statement on Thursday welcoming Vance and his family to the state and asked Vermont residents to do the same even if they have political differences with the vice president. Quote, I hope Vermonters remember the vice president is here on a family trip with his young children, and while we may not always agree, we should be respectful, end quote. A smaller number of protesters in support of Vance and Donald Trump also showed up with a welcome rally. According to Annie Palmer of CNBC, protesters lined a main thoroughfare in Waitsfield, Vermont, located near the Sugarbush Resort, where Vance and his family were vacationing. They held signs that said, Vance is a traitor, go ski in Russia, Trump serves Putin, and Vance disgraces our country, among other fiery messages. A small group of protesters also gathered at the Sugarbush Resort, though a spokesperson for the resort said it was largely, quote, a smooth day overall at the slopes. Quote, there were a handful of protesters at the resort throughout the day, but all were peaceful and none were disruptive, end quote. According to Curl Murphy Marcos with The Guardian, the protests followed a contentious confrontation in the Oval Office, where the U.S. president told Ukrainian leader to make a deal with Russia or, quote, we're out. At one point, Trump accused Zelenskyy of not showing enough gratitude for U.S. military and political aid, warning that he was, quote, gambling with World War III, end quote. Zelenskyy countered that he had repeatedly thanked the American people and their leaders for their support, but Ukrainians did not want to accept a ceasefire with Russia without security guarantees, since Russia's President Vladimir Putin had repeatedly broken previous ceasefire agreement. The aggressive meeting led to protests in cities and towns across the U.S., including New York, Los Angeles, and Boston, where hundreds gathered to express their support for Ukraine and Zelenskyy. Videos posted on social networks showed hundreds of demonstrators gathered in New York's Times Square, many carrying the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine on their backs. In Los Angeles County, a pro-Ukraine crowd rallied in front of a SpaceX facility, and protesters in Boston held an emergency rally for fair peace for Ukraine at Boston Common. Ukraine wants fair peace. Ukraine wants the war to end, the group in Boston supports Ukraine wrote on Facebook. Quote, Ukraine wants all of this on fair terms with security guarantees, end quote. For his part, Zelenskyy posted video of his warm reception in London on social networks, showing crowds of supporters lining the street outside Downing Street, where he was embraced by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I stand with Zelenskyy. I stand with Ukraine. I stand against Putin, Russia, and the American Republican Party that supports them. I'll be goddamned if I'll sit idly by while the same people who've been flying fuck your feeling flags for the last 5 years try to lecture dignified people about the amount of respect they deserve. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go get a mistletoe tramp stamp so fucking hypocrites can kiss my shiny hiney while you fuckers debate how much respect I deserve. There's my first shot on the war on Christmas, too. Woohoo! Europe is standing with Ukraine. According to Brian Melly and Emma Burrows with the AP, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer rallied his European counterparts Sunday to shore up their borders and throw their full weight behind Ukraine as he announced outlines of a plan to end Russia's war. Quote, every nation must contribute to that in the best way that it can, bringing different capabilities and support to the table, but all taking the responsibility to act, all stepping up their own share of the burden, end quote. Starmer's exhortation to 18 fellow leaders that they need to do the heavy lifting for their own security comes 2 days after U.S. backing of Ukraine appeared in jeopardy when President Donald Trump lashed out at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and said he wasn't grateful enough for America's support. Starmer said he had worked with France and Ukraine on a plan to end the war, and that a group of leaders, mostly from Europe, had agreed on 4 things. The steps towards peace would keep aid flowing to Kyiv and maintain economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine's hand, make sure Ukraine is at the bargaining table, and any peace deal must ensure its sovereignty and security, and continue to arm Ukraine and deter future invasion. Trump is Putin's bitch, and always has been. The entire reason the last election was so devastating for me was because I knew we'd voted to surrender to Russia on election night. And they've always been on the same page, coordinating their propaganda from the 2017 Helsinki summit, when Trump took Putin's word over our own intelligence, until last Friday, and everything in between. If you haven't seen it yet, it's because you refuse to. Thanks for watching. If you speak the truth, you're always right. Do svidaniya.